Woman in disguise gets kicked out of fancy restaurant. The next day, everyone gets fired. Elizabeth Parker nervously adjusted the beige cardigan she had purposely chosen that Tuesday morning. At 28 years old, she knew exactly what she was doing when she walked into the Bellevue, the most refined restaurant in New York City. The anonymous complaints that had been reaching her for months had finally convinced her to see with her own eyes what was happening in her establishments. It was then that manager Richard Thompson intercepted her in the middle of the main dining room, looking her up and down with evident contempt. "Sorry, but I think you've got the wrong place," he said, blocking her path to the tables. "This isn't exactly the kind of establishment for people like you." Elizabeth felt her heart race, but kept her expression calm. This was exactly what the anonymous letters described. She looked around and noticed all the other customers were wearing expensive clothes and shiny jewelry, while she had on just a simple blouse and a pair of discreet blue jeans. "I would like to have lunch here," she replied, her voice firm but quiet. Richard let out a dry laugh and gestured for two waiters to approach. The movement caught the attention of the entire restaurant, and Elizabeth felt dozens of curious eyes on her. "Look, dear, this is a five-star restaurant. Our dishes cost more than $200. I'm sure there are other places more suitable for your budget," he said, raising his voice enough for nearby customers to hear. A lady with grey hair and a pearl necklace whispered something to her husband, who nodded in agreement. A young couple discreetly took out their cell phone, as if to film the scene. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn, but not from shame, from indignation. "I have money to pay," she insisted, taking her wallet out of the simple bag she was carrying. "It's not about the money," Richard crossed his arms, clearly annoyed that she hadn't left voluntarily. "It's about the atmosphere. Our customers pay for the complete experience, understand? They expect a certain standard." The waiters who approached were young, probably college students working part-time. One of them, named Brandon, seemed uncomfortable with the situation, nervously fidgeting with his hands. The other, Tyler, mimicked the manager's arrogant posture. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out since we're just starting. Now back to the story. Mr. Richard, perhaps we could find her a table in the corner," Brandon suggested timidly. "Brandon," Richard scolded him harshly, "you don't understand anything about restaurant management. If we start accepting just anyone, we'll lose our elite clientele." Elizabeth observed the dynamic between them carefully. It was clear Brandon disagreed with the treatment, but was afraid to confront the manager. She filed that information away in her memory. "Please, I just want a table," she tried one more time. "No, ma'am, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Richard made a dramatic gesture toward the door. "Our restaurant has the right to refuse service, and I am exercising that right." The silence in the dining room was almost palpable. All the customers had stopped talking to watch the scene. Elizabeth saw on their faces a mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and in some cases, approval of the manager's behavior. "Very well," she said finally, putting her wallet away. "I'll leave." As she walked toward the exit, she heard some discreet applause coming from a table near the window. Richard smiled with satisfaction and waved to the customers as if he had just performed a heroic feat. "Thank you for your understanding," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "That's how we maintain the quality of the Bellevue." Elizabeth stopped at the door and turned one last time to look at the dining room. Her eyes met Brandon's, who quickly looked down. She memorized every detail of that moment. The elegant decor with crystal chandeliers, the marble tables, the expensive paintings on the walls, and especially the expressions of the people who witnessed her humiliation. Outside, she took a deep breath and grabbed her phone. She dialed her personal assistant, Melissa. "Melissa, I need you to cancel all my afternoon appointments," she said while walking along the busy sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. "And I want an emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 8 in the morning at the Bellevue. All employees must be present." "All of them, Elizabeth?" Melissa sounded surprised. "Including the kitchen and cleaning staff? Everyone. And I want you to prepare a complete dossier on Richard Thompson, professional history, evaluations, everything." "Did something happen?" Elizabeth stopped in front of her car, a discreet sedan she had purposely chosen to go unnoticed. She looked up at the building where the Bellevue was located and saw Richard gesturing animatedly to the employees through the window. "Yes, Melissa. Exactly what I hoped wouldn't happen, happened." That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She stayed in her home office, a modest apartment in the Greenwich Village neighborhood, reviewing financial reports and security footage that Melissa had managed to access. What she saw on the screens made her even more outraged. The cameras showed scene after scene of embarrassments, similar to what she had experienced. An elderly black woman in simple clothes being stopped at the entrance, an older man in flip-flops being escorted out by security, college students being directed only to tables near the restroom, away from the view of the important customers. But what shocked her most was a recording from 3 weeks ago. An elderly woman, about 70 years old, had managed to enter and sit down. She timidly asked for the menu, but Richard approached the table and said loudly enough for others to hear, "Ma'am, with all due respect, but I don't think you'll be able to afford our prices. How about I recommend a more affordable place right around the corner?" The woman left with tears in her eyes, leaving a $100 bill on the table as a tip, even though she hadn't consumed anything. It was as if she wanted to prove she had money, but it was already too late. Elizabeth turned off the computer and went to the kitchen to make some tea. While waiting for the water to boil, her memories went back 20 years, when she was just 8 years old. Her mother, Dorothy, worked as a cleaner in downtown offices. She saved money month after month to fulfill a simple dream, to take her daughter to dinner at an elegant restaurant on her birthday. Dorothy had chosen a famous place in Chinatown, saving every penny for 6 months. When they finally arrived at the restaurant wearing their best clothes, which were still simple, they were stopped at the door. The manager looked at Dorothy's clothes, at her calloused hands from work, and simply said there were no tables available. But Elizabeth could clearly see several empty tables through the window. Her mother didn't argue. She just took her daughter's hand, and they left in silence. They ate sandwiches on a bench in the square across the street, but Elizabeth never forgot the glint of sadness and humiliation in her mother's eyes. It was this memory that motivated her to build her own restaurant chain years later. When she inherited a small sum from a distant aunt at 18, instead of spending the money, she invested in a small restaurant on the outskirts. She worked 16 hours a day, waited tables, washed dishes, did everything. Success came gradually. Her unique quality was treating all customers with equal respect, regardless of how they were dressed or how much money they had. Her food was good and the service was warm. In 10 years, she had expanded to a chain of 15 restaurants spread throughout New York City. The Bellevue had been her most recent acquisition, a traditional restaurant that was in financial trouble. She had kept the original staff thinking she would preserve their expertise, but now she saw that had been a serious mistake. The kettle whistled, snapping her out of her thoughts. While preparing the tea, Elizabeth made a decision. It wasn't just about firing Richard. It was about completely transforming the culture of that place. The next morning, she arrived at the Bellevue at 7:45. She wore a discreet suit and carried a leather briefcase. Some employees were already arriving for the mysterious meeting Melissa had scheduled, all nervously chatting among themselves about what could be happening. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Brandon was one of the first to arrive. He greeted Elizabeth politely, not recognizing her from the scene the day before. He was clearly nervous, adjusting his uniform several times. "Good morning. You must be from Central Administration, right?" he asked. "I'm Brandon, a waiter here for 2 years." "Good morning, Brandon," she replied, studying his face. "Yes, I'm from administration. How have you been feeling working here?" Brandon hesitated, looking around to make sure Richard wasn't nearby. "It's a good job," he said carefully. "Demanding customers, but it's good." "Demanding how?" "Oh, you know, refined people. They expect a certain standard of service." Brandon repeated almost exactly the words Richard had used the day before. Elizabeth nodded without comment. Other employees kept arriving. Tyler, the waiter who had supported Richard, Samantha, the night shift manager, Charles, the sommelier. and the entire kitchen staff, led by Chef Andrew. When Richard arrived a few minutes before 8, he immediately took control of the situation. "Everyone, this must be an auditor from the company," he announced loudly. "I want all of you to show why the Bellevue is the best restaurant in the chain." He approached Elizabeth with a confident smile. "Richard Thompson, general manager." He introduced himself, extending his hand. "I'm sure the reports on my work are excellent. Just yesterday, I had to handle a delicate situation here, but I resolved it with great diplomacy." "A delicate situation?" Elizabeth asked, pretending to be curious. "A woman completely unsuitable for the environment tried to come in here, dressed like... well, you can imagine. I managed to convince her to leave without causing too much embarrassment to our real customers." Elizabeth saw Brandon look down uncomfortably. Samantha and Charles nodded in approval. Tyler smiled openly. "And how did you determine she was unsuitable?" asked Elizabeth. "Experience," Richard said proudly, tapping his chest. 15 years working in high-end restaurants. You develop an eye for these things. We know immediately who belongs in our environment and who doesn't." "I see." Elizabeth opened her briefcase and took out some papers. "Before we officially begin the meeting, I'd like to show you all a few things." She walked over to the screen on a side wall, usually used for special presentations. She connected her laptop and the first images appeared on the screen. "These are recordings from the security cameras over the last 3 months," she announced. The first video showed the scene with the elderly lady who had left crying. Then other similar scenes. Richard Thompson's expression gradually shifted from confidence to concern. "I don't understand what the problem is." He tried to keep his voice steady. "We're protecting the restaurant's image. Our customers pay a lot of money precisely so they don't have to share the space with certain people." "Certain people?" Elizabeth Parker turned to him with an expression that made the atmosphere tense. "People without class, without manners, who don't know how to behave in a refined setting." Richard was getting nervous but still tried to justify his actions. Brandon cleared his throat softly, as if he wanted to say something but didn't have the courage. Samantha looked at her own hands. Chef Andrew, who had remained silent until then, crossed his arms with a thoughtful expression. "Very well," said Elizabeth, turning off the screen. "Now I would like to introduce myself properly." She took a document from her folder and showed it to everyone. "My name is Elizabeth Parker, and I am the owner of this restaurant chain, including this one." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard visibly paled. Tyler opened his mouth in shock. Brandon widened his eyes and immediately recognized her as the woman from the previous day. "Yesterday I was here," continued Elizabeth, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Dressed simply, just wanting to have lunch in my own restaurant, and I was humiliatingly thrown out by Mr. Richard in front of all the customers." Richard tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. His face had changed from pale to red. I didn't know," he finally stammered. "If I had known who you were—" "Exactly," Elizabeth interrupted him. "If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently. And that is precisely the problem." She turned to the entire team. "Over the past 3 months, through security cameras and reports I received, I documented dozens of cases of discrimination in this restaurant. People being judged by their appearance, turned away for not wearing expensive clothes, publicly humiliated." Brandon finally found the courage to speak. "Ms. Elizabeth, I always felt uncomfortable with these situations. I tried to speak up a few times, but..." "But what?" Richard turned to Brandon angrily. "Were you going to ruin the restaurant's reputation because of some poor souls who showed up here?" "Some poor souls." Elizabeth's voice rose a tone. "Mr. Richard is referring to my customers as some poor souls?" Andrew, the chef, who had remained silent until then, decided to speak. "May I say something?" he asked, addressing Elizabeth. "I work in the kitchen, so I don't see much of what happens in the dining room. But sometimes I hear the waitstaff's comments, and I confess it made me uncomfortable." "What kind of comments?" Elizabeth asked. "Jokes about the customers, cruel imitations. Once I heard Tyler imitating a lady who had stuttered while placing her order. Everyone laughed in the kitchen." Andrew looked directly at Tyler, who lowered his head in shame. Samantha, who had remained silent until then, decided to speak up. "Ms. Elizabeth, I work the night shift, and I can assure you that at night things are different. We don't have these problems because our nighttime customers are more suitable. More suitable how? Elizabeth asked. Well, customers who frequent fine restaurants at night are usually executives, business people, people who understand protocol. Samantha didn't seem to realize she was digging an even deeper hole. Elizabeth nodded slowly, processing every word. I see. So you believe there are people who deserve to be treated well and people who don't. Is that it? The question hung in the air like an accusation. No one answered immediately. It was then that Richard, trying to save his own situation, made the biggest mistake of his career. Miss Elizabeth, with all due respect, I don't think you understand how the luxury restaurant market works. Our competitors do exactly the same thing. If we start accepting any kind of customer, we'll lose our exclusivity. That's how the market works. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The market works like that, Elizabeth repeated slowly. Then explain to me how I managed to build a network of 15 successful restaurants by treating every customer with dignity. Richard had no answer for that. He looked at his colleagues for support, but found only expressions of discomfort and anxiety. I'm going to be very clear with you, Elizabeth continued. This discriminatory behavior ends at this restaurant today. All of you are fired effective immediately. The announcement landed like a bomb. Samantha started crying. Tyler tried to protest. Richard turned red with anger. You can't do this, he exploded. I have 15 years of experience. I have labor rights. I'll sue this company. Feel free, Elizabeth replied calmly. We have everything documented, including your conduct yesterday, which was witnessed by dozens of customers. Brandon, who had remained silent, timidly raised his hand. Ms. Elizabeth, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I really need this job. I'm paying for my business administration degree and helping my mother with the household expenses. I never agreed with these treatments, but I was afraid of losing my job. Elizabeth studied his face for a moment. Brandon, did you say you tried to question these attitudes a few times? Yes, ma'am. Once I suggested to Richard that we could at least give people a chance, but he said I was inexperienced and didn't understand anything about business. Andrew also spoke up. Miss Elizabeth, I really didn't know this was happening so frequently. In the kitchen, we focus on preparing the food as best as possible for all customers, without distinction. If I had personally seen some of these scenes, what would you have done? Asked Elizabeth. I would have said something. My grandmother went through similar situations when I was a child. She worked as a housekeeper, and sometimes, when she took me to her job, I saw how some people treated her. I never forgot that. Elizabeth realized that not everyone there was the same. There were differences in motivations and the degree of participation in the discrimination that was happening. Very well, she said finally. I'm going to make a different proposal. Instead of simply firing all of you, I'm going to offer an opportunity for redemption. Everyone paid attention immediately. I'm going to close this restaurant for 3 months for a complete renovation, not just physical, but cultural. Anyone who wants to participate in an intensive awareness and community service program can remain with the company. Anyone who doesn't want to receives the standard severance and is free to go. Richard immediately shook his head. I'm not going to submit to any program like that. I'm not the one who needs to change. The market is just like this, he said arrogantly. I'd rather leave and work at a place that values my experience. That's fine, Elizabeth nodded. Does anyone else want to leave now? Tyler hesitated for a moment but ended up raising his hand. I think I'd rather leave too. I have nothing against these people, but I believe every place has its target audience, you know? I understand, said Elizabeth. Samantha wiped the tears from her eyes. I need this job, Miss Elizabeth. I'm a single mother, and I support 2 children. If you're offering a chance to stay, I want to participate in the program. Even without truly believing in the change? Elizabeth asked directly. Samantha hesitated but decided to be honest. I'll be frank with you, Mom. I truly believed we were protecting the restaurant's standards, but seeing these recordings today, some situations were really too cruel. Maybe I need to rethink some things." "This honesty is a good start," said Elizabeth. "Brandon?" "Yes, ma'am. I want to participate. I want to learn to do better," he replied promptly. "Andrew?" "Of course. Actually, I'm curious to understand better how I can contribute to positive change." Elizabeth looked at the other kitchen and cleaning staff members who had remained quieter during the whole discussion. "And you?" A woman around 50 years old who worked in cleaning raised her hand. "Ma'am, my name is Lucy. I've worked here for 3 years cleaning the restaurant. Can I say something?" "Of course, Lucy." "I always saw these situations happening, but I never said anything because I thought it wasn't my place to speak, but my heart always felt heavy. Once I saw a young woman crying in the bathroom after being mistreated here. She was dressed simply, but she seemed like a good person. I couldn't get that out of my head for weeks." "And why did you never say anything?" Elizabeth asked gently. "Because I'm a simple person too, ma'am. I thought if I said something, they'd fire me too. Cleaning jobs are easy to find, but here the pay is good and the company treats us well. At least treats us employees well." Elizabeth felt a pang in her heart. Lucy had touched on a crucial point: the hierarchy of treatment. Employees were treated well, but customers were judged by appearance. "Lucy, would you like to participate in the program too?" "If it's to learn how to treat people better, yes, ma'am. Even though I'm in cleaning, sometimes I see customers in the hallways, and I want to know how to greet everyone in the same polite way." At the end of the meeting, Richard and Tyler left. The other employees, Brandon, Samantha, Andrew, Lucy, and 6 more people from the kitchen and cleaning staff, agreed to participate in the 3-month program. "Very well," said Elizabeth. "Over the next 3 months, you'll work in different locations around the city: community kitchens, shelters, social assistance centers. You'll serve meals to people from all walks of life. You'll hear stories. You'll understand that dignity has nothing to do with money in the bank." Brandon raised his hand. "Ms. Elizabeth, may I ask a question?" "Of course." "Do you really believe we can change?" Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Brandon, when I was 8 years old, my mother was humiliated in a restaurant just like I was yesterday. She worked as a cleaner, but she dreamed of taking me to dinner at a nice place for my birthday. When we got there, they didn't even let us in. The silence in the dining room was total. Everyone was paying attention to every word. My mother never wanted to go to a fancy restaurant again. She said it wasn't a place for people like us. And you know what that taught me? That I never ever wanted another child to see their mother humiliated like that." "And was that why you opened the restaurants?" asked Samantha. "It was. I wanted to create places where all people would be welcome, where a mother could take her child to celebrate a birthday without fear of being judged by the clothes she was wearing." Andrew, who had been thoughtful, made an observation. "Miss Elizabeth, you said you have 15 restaurants. Do they all operate in this inclusive way?" "Yes. And they're all profitable. Know why? Because when you treat people with respect, they come back. They recommend us to friends. They become loyal customers. Positive word of mouth is worth more than any advertising." "But what about the high-end clientele?" asked Samantha. "Aren't they bothered by sharing the space with different kinds of people?" Elizabeth smiled. "Samantha, truly refined customers, people who really have class, aren't bothered by others' origins or appearances. On the contrary, they recognize and value respectful service. What drives customers away is arrogance and poor service, not diversity." Lucy, who had been quiet, made a surprising observation. "Mom, can I tell you something I saw here?" "Of course, Lucy." "Once I was cleaning the bathroom when I overheard a conversation between 2 wealthy ladies. One of them was complaining that she didn't like coming here because she found the service too snobbish. She said she preferred another restaurant, where she felt more at ease even though it was less luxurious." "You see," said Elizabeth, "even the customers who seemingly benefited from exclusivity weren't completely satisfied." Brandon was clearly processing all this information. "Ms. Elizabeth, when do we start the program?" "Next Monday. But first, I want each of you to do some deep thinking about your own attitudes and prejudices. Write down on a piece of paper a situation where you felt judged or mistreated because of your appearance or background. Bring it on Monday." The following week, the program began. The first place they visited was a community kitchen in the Chinatown neighborhood, ironically close to the restaurant where Elizabeth had been humiliated as a child. The kitchen coordinator, Ms. Mary, a 60-year-old lady with graying hair and a welcoming smile, greeted the group. "Welcome," she said. "Here we serve about 200 meals a day for people in vulnerable situations. But it's not just food we offer. It's dignity, conversation, a moment of care." Brandon observed the environment. It was simple, clean, functional. Very different from the luxury of the Bellevue, but there was something special in the air, a feeling of purpose, of humanity. "Today, you're going to help serve lunch," continued Ms. Mary. "But I want you to do more than just put food on plates. Talk to people, ask their names, look them in the eyes. Every person who comes through here has a story." Samantha was visibly nervous. "Ms. Mary, I've never done this kind of work. I'm afraid I'll say something wrong." "Honey, you don't need to be afraid, you just need to be genuine. Treat each person the way you would want to be treated if you were in their place." The first people started arriving for lunch. Andrew, who was in charge of serving the main dish, greeted each one politely. Brandon handed out bread and kept up quick, kind conversations. That's when a gentleman around 70 years old arrived, wearing worn but clean clothes. He approached the line timidly. "Good afternoon," said Brandon with a smile. "How are you today?" "Well, thank you, son," replied the gentleman in a low voice. "You're new here, right?" "Yes, we are. I'm learning about this wonderful work you all do here." The gentleman smiled sadly. "You know, son, I used to own a small business, a clothing store, but life takes turns we don't expect." Brandon was curious but didn't want to be intrusive. "Would you like to tell me a bit about that?" "My store went bankrupt 2 years ago. My wife got sick. We had a lot of medical expenses. We lost everything. Now I live with my daughter, but I come here sometimes because here I feel like a person, you understand." "How so, Mr.?" Brandon realized he didn't know his name. "Edward Miller. And you?" "Brandon. Very nice to meet you, Mr. Edward." "My pleasure, Brandon. When I say that here I feel like a person, it's because in other places people look at me and see just a poor old man. Here, Ms. Mary and the volunteers call me by my name, ask about my granddaughter, remember old conversations. It's different." Brandon felt a lump in his throat. He was understanding, in practice, what it meant to treat someone with dignity. "Mr. Edward, will you come back tomorrow?" "Yes, I will." "Why?" "Because I want to continue our conversation. I'd like to hear more about your store and your family." Edward's face lit up. "It would be my pleasure, son." On the other side of the kitchen, Samantha was having her own revelation. A young woman who looked to be about 25 approached to receive her meal. "Hi, how are you?" said Samantha, serving the rice. "I'm great, thank you," replied the young woman with a genuine smile. "Do you come here often?" "Yes, I do. I've been unemployed for 6 months, and this place has helped me a lot. Not just with the food, but with hope too." Samantha was surprised. The young woman spoke well, seemed educated, didn't match the stereotype she had of people who frequented community kitchens. "What field are you looking for work in?" "I have a degree in marketing, but it's been tough. Meanwhile, I do some freelance graphic design work, but it's not enough for all the expenses." "Marketing?" Samantha became interested. "I've worked in restaurants for 10 years. I've always admired marketing people." "That's so cool. At which restaurant?" Samantha hesitated. How to explain where she worked without sounding snobby? "At a restaurant in the city center." "And you, what kind of marketing would you like to work in?" "Oh, anything related to food would be perfect. I love that world. I've even thought about taking a culinary course too." The two chatted for a few more minutes, and Samantha walked away with a completely different perspective. That young woman wasn't very different from her. She was just going through a tough time in her life. Andrew also had his own meaningful experience. A middle-aged man who clearly had once been successful from the remnants of elegance in his gestures approached his station. "Good afternoon," said Andrew. "How is your day going?" "Getting better now," replied the man. "It always gets better here." "Have you been coming to this place for a long time?" "For 8 months." since I lost my job as a bank manager and couldn't find another in the same field. Age caught up with me, you know how it is. Andrew almost dropped the ladle, a former bank manager, someone who had probably dined at the Bellevue in better times. That transition must be difficult. Yes, it is. But you know what I've learned? That life can change for anyone at any time. And that kindness, respect, and dignity are the only things that really matter. That night, when they returned home, each carried deep reflections about the day. Elizabeth had asked them to meet at the end of the week to share their experiences. When they met on Friday, the transformation was already visible on everyone's faces. "Who would like to share first?" asked Elizabeth. Brandon raised his hand. "I met Mr. Edward, a gentleman who had a clothing store his whole life and lost everything when his wife got sick. He made me understand that any one of us could be on the other side of that line at any moment." "Go on," encouraged Elizabeth. "I always thought that people who needed help were, I don't know, uneducated people without ambition. But Mr. Edward told me about the plans he had for the store, about how well he treated his employees, about the pride he took in the business. He's no different from me. He just had bad luck." Samantha also wanted to speak. "I talked with a young woman who has a degree in marketing. Smart, articulate, full of dreams. She's unemployed, but she hasn't given up. And I realized the only difference between me and her is that I have a job now and she doesn't. Tomorrow it could be the opposite." Andrew nodded. "I spoke with a former bank manager, someone who probably ate at our restaurant when he had a different life, and he said something that stayed engraved in my mind. Kindness, respect, and dignity are the only things that really matter." Elizabeth smiled, seeing the genuine change happening. "And what did you learn about yourselves?" Lucy, who had been quieter during the week, decided to speak. "I learned that it doesn't matter if I'm cleaning a restaurant or serving food in a community kitchen. What matters is how I treat people. I always thought my work was invisible, but now I understand that every human interaction is an opportunity to make someone feel better." The following weeks were intense. The group visited shelters, nursing homes, social projects in different neighborhoods of New York City. Each experience brought new learnings and questions. In the fourth week, they went to a nursing home in the eastern part of the city. The place was simple but well kept, and housed people who had no family or whose families couldn't take care of them. It was there that Samantha had the encounter that would change her life forever. Among the residents was a lady about 80 years old, with neatly styled white hair and kind eyes. She was sitting alone in a wheelchair, looking out the window. "Good afternoon," said Samantha, approaching. "May I keep you company?" "Of course, dear. That would be a pleasure. My name is Samantha." "I'm Ms. Nancy. Very nice to meet you, Samantha." They talked for a few minutes about trivial things until Samantha noticed that Ms. Nancy was watching her intently. "Are you all right?" asked Samantha. "Yes, dear. It's just that you remind me of someone I met a long time ago." "Who?" "A young woman who worked at a fancy restaurant downtown. She was very kind to me during a difficult time in my life." Samantha felt her heart race. "What restaurant was it?" "Oh, I don't remember the exact name. It was a beautiful place, with marble tables and waiters in ties. I had gone there with my granddaughter to celebrate her birthday, but, well, it didn't go very well." "What happened?" asked Samantha, already suspecting the answer. "The manager said there was no table available, but it was a lie. There were several empty tables. I think he thought I didn't have the money to pay because of my simple clothes." Samantha swallowed hard. "And the young woman who was kind to you?" "Oh, she was nearby when it happened. After the manager dismissed us, she followed me out to the street and apologized for what had happened. She said she didn't agree with it. She even offered to recommend another good, more affordable restaurant." Samantha's eyes welled up. "Ms. Nancy, by any chance, was this about 3 years ago?" "Yes, it was." "How do you know?" "Because I was that young woman." The silence that followed was filled with emotion. Ms. Nancy studied Samantha's face, and her eyes lit up with recognition. "My goodness, it really is you," she exclaimed, holding Samantha's hands. "I never forgot your kindness that day." Samantha began to cry. "Miss Nancy, I remember you too. And I remember my heart aching because I couldn't do more. I should have stood up to the manager. I should have insisted that you be treated properly. Dear, you did what you could at that moment, and your kindness meant so much to me. My granddaughter was sad about what happened, but when you came to talk to us, she understood that there are good people in the world. How is your granddaughter now? Ms. Nancy smiled with pride. She graduated from law school last year, and you know what she always says? That she wants to work defending people who are treated unfairly. I think that day at the restaurant taught her something important too. Samantha held Ms. Nancy's hands tenderly. Ms. Nancy, I want you to know that I'm working to make sure situations like that never happen again. I'm learning, changing, growing. I know, dear. I can see in your eyes that you've always been a good person. Sometimes we just need courage to follow our hearts. When Samantha told this story to the group at the weekly meeting, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The coincidence of meeting Ms. Nancy again had been a powerful sign that change was possible and necessary. Samantha, said Elizabeth, how do you feel about this reunion? I feel like I've been given a second chance, a chance to do things differently, to be better. And I understood that that small kindness I showed 3 years ago planted a seed. Now I want to make that seed grow into a big tree. Brandon had also had transformative experiences. Besides his Edward, he had met college students who depended on scholarships and part-time jobs to be able to study. Some of them attended the social projects not because they didn't have money for food, but because they wanted to contribute as volunteers. I discovered something about myself, said Brandon at the meeting. I always judge people by their appearance because I was afraid of being judged by my own appearance. I come from a simple family. My mother is a housekeeper. My father is a construction worker. When I started working at the Bellevue, I felt like I was finally moving up in life. And to feel better, I started looking down on other people. And now? Asked Elizabeth. Now I understand that there is no looking down or looking up at people. There are just people, and they all deserve respect and dignity. Andrew had also gone through transformations. Working in the community kitchens, he had learned about sustainability, food utilization, and most importantly, about cooking with love for people who really need affection. In the Bellevue kitchen, I always focused on technique, impeccable presentation, refined flavor. Here I learned that cooking is also about nutrition, about economy, about making the most with the least. And I discovered that a simple soup made with care can bring more satisfaction than a sophisticated dish made just to impress. Lucy, who initially thought she wouldn't have much to contribute because she worked in cleaning, had proven to be one of the most observant in the group. I learned that my work is very important. Keeping a place clean and welcoming is giving dignity to those who are using that space. It doesn't matter if it's a luxury restaurant or a community kitchen. Cleanliness is love, it's care, it's respect. At the end of the second month, Elizabeth decided to try something different. She took the group to visit one of her other restaurants, Home Flavor, located in the Greenwich Village neighborhood. I want you to see how a restaurant that has always operated with the values we're learning works, she explained. The atmosphere at Home Flavor was welcoming, decorated with plants and rustic furniture. There was an interesting mix of customers, executives lunching alone, families with children, college students, elderly couples, groups of friends. What's the first thing you notice? Asked Elizabeth. The diversity, Brandon replied immediately. Very different people sharing the same space naturally. Exactly, and observe the service. They spent 2 hours discreetly observing. The waiters treated all customers the same way, polite, attentive, smiling. There was no difference in treatment between the executive in an expensive suit and the student in flip-flops. How do you think the customers feel? Asked Elizabeth. Samantha observed a table where a simple lady was having lunch with 2 small children. They feel at ease. The lady over there is laughing with her grandchildren. They're playing without fear of bothering anyone. At the Bellevue, that family wouldn't even have entered. And do you think this harms the atmosphere? Insisted Elizabeth Parker. Andrew looked around. On the contrary, the atmosphere is more cheerful, more human. There's life here. Very well. Now I want you to talk to some customers. Discreetly ask about their experience here. Brandon approached a couple of executives in their 40s. Excuse me, we don't want to bother you. We're conducting a survey about restaurants in the city. Have you been coming to this place for a long time? For about 2 years, replied the woman. It's our favorite restaurant in the area. What do you like most here? Besides the good food, it's the welcoming atmosphere, said the man. We feel at home. There isn't that pressure of some fancy restaurants where you're afraid of making noise or behaving inappropriately. Have you had bad experiences at other restaurants? Yes, the woman lowered her voice. Once we went to a very snobbish place where the waiter treated us poorly because my clothes were a bit wrinkled. I had come straight from a long meeting and didn't have time to freshen up. It was humiliating. Samantha, across the room, spoke with a young woman who was having lunch alone, reading a book. Excuse me, may I ask you something? Do you come here often? Yes, I do. About 3 times a week. I work in an office nearby. And why did you choose this place? Because I can come alone without feeling embarrassed. The waiters are respectful, they don't pressure me to order more or leave quickly, and the price is fair. Have you had bad experiences at other restaurants? Yes. Places where they look at you sideways if you're alone, or where they rush you if you don't order dessert. Here I can read my book in peace. The conversations confirmed something Elizabeth already knew. When you treat people well, regardless of who they are, you create loyalty and a genuinely welcoming atmosphere. At the end of the day, gathered again, the group processed everything they had seen. What did you learn today? Asked Elizabeth. That inclusion doesn't harm quality, said Andrew. The food here is excellent, the service is impeccable, but without arrogance. That people value being treated as human beings, added Samantha. All the customers I spoke with mentioned feeling at ease, respected, welcomed, and that a diverse environment is richer, more interesting, completed Brandon. There was positive energy in the air, unlike the tension that always existed at the Bellevue. Lucy, always observant, made a surprising observation. I noticed that even the employees here seemed happier. They smiled genuinely, it wasn't just politeness. Very well observed, Lucy, said Elizabeth. When you work in an environment based on respect and inclusion, you also feel better about yourself. There's no weight on your conscience, no need to pretend to be someone you're not. In the 8th week of the program, Elizabeth had planned a special activity. Each member of the group was to choose one person they met during community work and invite them to dinner at one of the chain's restaurants. Not the Bellevue, which was still closed, but another in the chain. The goal is for you to practice receiving and serving these people as special guests. I want you to put yourselves in the role of hosts and make them feel truly welcome. Brandon chose his Edward Miller. Samantha chose Ms. Nancy. Andrew chose the former bank manager, whose name was Charles. Lucy chose a lady she met at one of the shelters, Ms. Angela. The scheduled evening was emotional. Elizabeth observed discreetly from a distant table as her former team at the Bellevue welcomed their special guests. Brandon had prepared carefully to receive Edward. He arrived early at the restaurant, spoke with the waiters, explained the situation, and asked them to treat his guest like royalty. When Edward arrived wearing his best clothes, which were still simple, Brandon greeted him at the door with a warm smile. Mr. Edward, so glad you could come. Brandon, my boy, what a beautiful place. Edward looked around in amazement. You deserve good things. Shall we go to our table? During dinner, Brandon talked with Edward about his life, his dreams, his family. He discovered that the gentleman had served in the army in his youth, traveled across the United States, and raised 3 children with much love and dedication. You know, Brandon, Edward said at one point, it's been a long time since I felt so important. Thank you for inviting me. Mr. Edward, you are important. You always have been. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of that. Samantha had brought Ms. Nancy, who arrived accompanied by her granddaughter, Jennifer, now a 24-year-old young lawyer. Ms. Nancy, Jennifer, welcome. Samantha, what a wonderful surprise your invitation was, said Ms. Nancy, and what a beautiful place. Jennifer, your grandmother told me you graduated from law school. Congratulations. Thank you. And thank you for being kind to my grandmother that day 3 years ago. She always talked about it. During dinner, Samantha got to know Jennifer better, who indeed worked defending vulnerable people. The young woman talked about cases she took pro bono, about her work at an NGO that offered free legal assistance. "You know, Samantha," Jennifer said, "that day at the restaurant was important for me. Seeing my grandmother treated disrespectfully made me understand that I wanted to work to make that happen less in the world." Andrew had invited Charles, the former bank manager. It was an evening of deep conversations about loss, new beginnings, and dignity. "Andrew, I can't believe you remembered me," said Charles. "And on top of that, you invited me to such an elegant place as this." "Charles, our conversation at the community kitchen meant a lot to me. You said that kindness, respect, and dignity are the only things that really matter. I wanted to give back those three things." During dinner, Charles talked about his professional journey, about the values he had always tried to maintain, even in a competitive corporate environment. "You know, Andrew, when I lost my job, it was hard, but it was also liberating. I discovered who my real friends are, learned to value simple things, understood that professional success doesn't define character. And now, do you have plans?" "I'm thinking about working with microcredit, helping small entrepreneurs who can't get loans from traditional banks. I want to use my experience to do something that really helps people." Lucy had invited Ms. Angela, a 75-year-old lady who lived in a shelter after losing her home in a flood. "Ms. Angela, you look beautiful today." "Oh, Lucy dear, it's been a while since I dressed up like this. I even bought a new blouse for the occasion." "You deserve all the good things in the world." During dinner, Ms. Angela talked about her life as a retired teacher, about the books she read, about the stories she liked to tell the children at the social projects she attended. "Lucy, did you know I also cleaned houses to supplement my retirement?" "Really, Ms. Angela?" "Really, and I was always proud of my work. Leaving a place clean and organized is a form of affection, of care. You do very important work." "Thank you for saying that, Ms. Angela. Sometimes we think our work doesn't matter much." "It does matter, my dear. Every job done with love and dedication matters." At the end of the evening, Elizabeth Parker gathered with the group to hear about their experiences. "How did you feel being hosts?" Brandon was the first to respond. "I felt honored. Mr. Edward Miller has so much wisdom, so many interesting stories. I realized I was learning more from him than teaching." "Very good, Brandon. And what did you notice about your guests?" Samantha was emotional. "Ms. Nancy and Jennifer are incredible people, cultured, intelligent, full of dreams and plans. In the past, I would have only looked at Ms. Nancy's simple clothes and missed the chance to meet two extraordinary people." Andrew nodded. "Charles has a very rich life experience. His insights on leadership and ethics in business were more valuable than any course I've ever taken." Lucy smiled. "Ms. Angela made me feel proud of my work. She said cleaning is a form of care. I had never thought of it that way." "And what did they all have in common?" asked Elizabeth. "Dignity," they answered almost in unison. "Exactly. Regardless of their current financial situation, they all had rich stories, valuable experiences, dreams, and plans. The only difference between them and the VIP customers of the old Bellevue was the money in their bank accounts at that specific moment." Brandon made an important reflection. "Ms. Elizabeth, I noticed something. During dinner with Mr. Edward Miller, other restaurant customers looked at our table with curiosity, but not with judgment. There was genuine interest, not disdain." "And why do you think that happened?" "Because our attitude was different," said Samantha. "We were treating our guests with genuine respect and care. It showed throughout the whole place." Andrew completed the thought. "And because this restaurant has a culture of inclusion, the other customers are used to diversity. They don't find it strange to see different people." In the third month, with the reopening of the Bellevue approaching, Elizabeth decided to run the final test of the program. She asked each member of the group to bring someone from their family or personal circle to experience the restaurant's new concept. "I want to see how you handle real situations with people who know you and might question the changes." Brandon decided to invite his mother, Ms. Connie, a 50-year-old woman who worked as a housekeeper in wealthy family homes. "Mom, I want to take you to see my work." "Son, You know I don't feel comfortable in these fancy places. Trust me, Mom, it will be different. When they arrived at the renovated Bellevue, now with a cozier decor, keeping its elegance but losing its coldness, Miss Connie was impressed. Wow, Brandon, what a beautiful place. But are you sure I can come in here? Of course you can, Mum. This place is for all people who deserve to be treated well, and you deserve all the good in the world. During lunch, Brandon introduced his mother to Elizabeth, who made a point of talking with her at length. Ms. Connie, Brandon told me you work in family homes. It must be a job that requires a lot of dedication. Yes, Ms. Elizabeth. I take care of the houses as if they were my own. I like to see everything clean and organized. And how do the families treat you? Miss Connie hesitated but decided to be honest. Well, it varies. Some families treat me well, with respect. Others, not so much, but I do my job with dedication anyway. Have you ever been in an unpleasant situation? Yes. Once, a boss called me to serve during a party she was hosting. When the guests arrived, she asked me to enter and leave the room without looking at anyone, to be invisible. It hurt my heart, but I needed the job. Brandon held his mother's hand. Mom, you never told me that. Son, we get used to it, but it does hurt, yes. Elizabeth Parker was moved. Ms. Connie, I want you to know that here she will always be treated as our special guest, and I hope Brandon has learned, through his work here, to value you even more. Samantha had invited her younger sister, Carol, 22 years old, who worked as a salesperson in a clothing store. Carol, you'll see how I've changed, how I've learned important things. Samantha, you've always been cool. I don't know what this change is all about. During lunch, Samantha told her sister about the whole transformation process. Carol, I discovered I had prejudices I didn't even realize. I judged people by their appearance, by the way they dressed. Really? I never noticed that in you. Because you know me as a sister. But at work, I repeated attitudes I learned thinking they were normal in fancy restaurants. And now I understand that true elegance is treating everyone with respect and dignity. Carol looked around the restaurant and saw the diversity of customers coexisting harmoniously. Wow, Samantha, it's true. There are all kinds of people here, and the atmosphere is super pleasant. Andrew had invited his father, Mr. John, a 65-year-old retired mechanic. Dad, I want to show you where I work now. Son, a fancy place like this isn't for me. Dad, trust me, it is for you. Mr. John arrived wearing his best dress shirt and khaki pants, clearly nervous. Andrew, what a beautiful place, but it must be expensive, right? Dad, today you're my guest. Relax and enjoy. During lunch, Andrew introduced his father to Elizabeth and his colleagues. This is my father, John. He worked his whole life as a mechanic and taught me everything about honesty and hard work. Mr. John was moved by the loving way his son spoke of him. Miss Elizabeth, Andrew has always been a good boy. I'm glad he's working in a place that values people. Mr. John, Andrew is an exceptional professional, and I can see where he got his values from. Lucy had invited her daughter, Rebecca, 25 years old, who worked as a nursing assistant. Daughter, I want to show you the new place where I work. Mum, you're so excited about this job, I'm happy to see it. When they arrived at the restaurant, Rebecca was surprised. Mum, what an elegant place. You really work here? I do, daughter, and I learned that my work is very important to make people feel good. During lunch, Lucy told her daughter about her whole journey of self-discovery. Rebecca, I learned that taking care of spaces is taking care of people. When I leave everything clean and tidy, I'm showing care for those who will use that place. Mom, you've always been dedicated to your work, but now I see you have a different kind of pride. It's true. Before I did it out of obligation. Now I do it out of love. At the end of that special afternoon, Elizabeth gathered with the whole group and their family members. I'd like each family to share how they felt here today. Ms. Connie, Brandon's mother, was the first to speak. I felt at home. I didn't feel judged for my clothes or my simple ways, and I saw how my son has grown, how he's learned to value people. Carol, Samantha's sister, nodded. I didn't know restaurants like this existed. Elegant places where you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not. Samantha, you seem happier, lighter. Mr. John, Andrew's father, was emotional. "Andrew, you made me feel proud, not just because of the beautiful place you work, but because of the person you've become. I saw how you treat people with respect. I learned watching you today." Rebecca, Lucy's daughter, held her mother's hand. "Mum, I've always admired your work, but today I understood that you've found your purpose. You're radiating joy." Elizabeth smiled, moved. "Do you know what you just witnessed? The transformative power of respect and dignity, not just for those who receive it, but also for those who offer it." In the last week before the official reopening, Elizabeth prepared a surprise for the group. She had invited some of the customers who had been mistreated in the past to a special reconciliation dinner. "I want you to have the opportunity to personally apologize to some of the people who were harmed by the old culture of this restaurant." Among the guests were Ms. Nancy and her granddaughter Jennifer, Mr. Edward, the former manager Charles, Ms. Angela, and a young woman named Faith who had been humiliated 6 months earlier when she tried to celebrate her graduation at the venue. Faith arrived visibly nervous. "I don't know why I agreed to come here," she said to Elizabeth. "That experience was terrible. Faith, the people who mistreated you no longer work here, and those who are here now want to do things differently. Would you give us a chance?" During dinner, each member of the team made a point of talking with Faith and the other guests. Brandon approached her. "Faith, I was here the day you were mistreated. I didn't do anything to help, and it weighs on my conscience. May I apologize?" Faith looked at him, surprised. "You were really there?" "I was, and I felt very bad about the situation, but I didn't have the courage to say anything. I've learned that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. And now? Now I promise I will never stay silent again when I see someone being treated disrespectfully." Samantha also approached. "Faith, I was there that day too. I know you had just graduated in education and wanted to celebrate with your family." "How do you know that?" "Because I heard when you explained to the manager that it was a special moment for you, and that should have made the night even more special, not the opposite." "It really hurt a lot," Faith confessed. "I had saved for months to be able to bring my parents here. I wanted them to feel proud." "And they were proud of you, regardless of where you celebrated, I'm sure," said Samantha kindly. "But you deserve to have the night you planned." Andrew joined the conversation. "Faith, may I ask how the celebration went after you left here?" "We went to a pizzeria near my house. My parents tried to hide it, but I saw that they were hurt too. Not because of the pizzeria, which was great, but because of the treatment we received here." "And how are they now?" asked Lucy, who had also approached. "Well, my father always says that truly polite people don't need to humiliate others to feel important. He said the problem wasn't with me, but with those who treated me badly." "Your father is very wise," said Elizabeth, joining the group. "Faith, I would like to know if you would give us a second chance, not as a favor to us, but as an opportunity to show that we have learned and changed." Faith looked around, seeing the welcoming atmosphere, the diversity of customers, the genuine expressions of regret and transformation from the team. "Do you know what hurt me the most that day?" she said finally. "It wasn't even the bad treatment. It was seeing that no one said anything. All the people who were here just watched and did nothing. And that will never happen here again," promised Brandon. "If someone is mistreated in my presence, I will intervene." "Me too," said Samantha. "All of us," added Andrew. Faith smiled for the first time that night. "Then yes, you have a second chance." During the rest of the dinner, something magical happened. The guests who had been mistreated in the past began talking among themselves, sharing experiences and creating genuine connections. Mr. Edward discovered that Charles, the former bank manager, had also lost his job because of his age. Ms. Nancy and Ms. Angela discovered they had both been teachers. Faith became interested in the social projects Jennifer developed as a lawyer. "Are you seeing this?" Elizabeth whispered to her team. "When you create an environment of respect and inclusion, people naturally connect. Friendships, partnerships, and opportunities emerge." At the end of the evening, Faith approached Elizabeth. "Thank you for inviting me. Tonight healed a wound I've carried for months." Thank you for coming and for giving us a second chance. And may I make a suggestion? Of course. How about creating a program where people like us, who've experienced discrimination, can share their stories? Not to gain pity, but to educate, to show that behind every appearance there's a person with dreams, stories, and dignity. Elizabeth smiled. Faith, that's a brilliant idea. Would you like to help develop this program? It would be an honor. On the eve of the official reopening, Elizabeth gathered her team for a final conversation. Tomorrow we begin a new chapter, not just for the restaurant, but for our lives. I want each of you to tell me what you've learned during these 3 months. Brandon was first. I learned that empathy isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. When you put yourself in someone else's shoes, you make better decisions, treat people better, live better. Samantha nodded. I learned that prejudice hurts those who suffer from it, but also those who practice it. For years I carried a weight on my conscience without realizing it. Now I feel lighter. Andrew reflected for a moment. I learned that excellence and inclusion aren't opposite concepts. On the contrary, you only achieve true excellence when you include, when you welcome, when you respect. Lucy smiled. I learned that all work has dignity when done with love, and that I can make a difference in people's lives, even through small acts of care and kindness. Elizabeth became emotional, and I learned something from all of you, that real transformation is possible when people are open to questioning their prejudices and changing. You've given me hope. Ms. Elizabeth, said Brandon, may I ask a personal question? Of course. Have you completely forgiven Richard and Tyler? Elizabeth thought for a moment. Brandon, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or accepting harmful behavior. It means releasing the anger and resentment that only harm the person carrying them. I forgave because I want to focus my energy on building something positive, not on nurturing grudges. And if they came back asking for an opportunity, if they showed genuine change and willingness to learn, as you all have demonstrated, I would consider it. But not out of obligation, but because I believe every person can grow. Samantha made an important observation. Ms. Elizabeth, during these 3 months, some people asked me if I wasn't being hypocritical for changing my views so much. How should I respond to that? Samantha, changing your views based on new experiences and reflections isn't hypocrisy, it's growth. Hypocrisy would be maintaining harmful behaviors while knowing they're wrong. On reopening day, a line formed outside the Bellevue. News about the restaurant's transformation had spread through social media, and many people were curious to see the change. Among the first customers were all the special guests from recent months. Mr. Edward, Ms. Nancy with her granddaughter Jennifer, Charles, Ms. Angela, Faith, and many others. But there were also regular customers, people who had frequented the restaurant during its discriminatory era. Elizabeth watched everyone's reactions closely. A business couple who used to frequent the old Bellevue arrived and seemed surprised by the changes in decor and clientele. How strange, the woman commented to her husband. This place is very different. Brandon, who was serving them, heard the comment. Good evening, how can I help you? We used to come here before. The atmosphere was more exclusive, said the man with some nostalgia. I understand, Brandon replied with a smile. May I ask what you most appreciated about the old format? The elegance, the sophistication, answered the woman. That's great. You'll notice we've kept all the culinary quality and sophistication of the service. The only thing that changed is that now all customers are treated with the same level of excellence. The couple sat down, still a bit hesitant, but throughout the evening, observing the impeccable service and welcoming atmosphere, their expressions began to change. You know, said the woman at the end of dinner, the atmosphere really is more pleasant now. There's more life, more human warmth. And did you notice how the staff seems happier? Added the husband. The service is even better than before. During the evening, several situations tested the restaurant's new culture. A family with young children arrived, and the children were a bit restless. In Richard's time, this family would have been directed to a hidden corner, or even discouraged from staying. Samantha, who was serving them, approached with a smile. Good evening. What a beautiful family. How old are the little ones? 3 and 5, replied the mother, clearly nervous. They're a bit fussy today. If they bother other customers, we'll leave. Not at all. Children bring joy to any place. We have some crayons and paper here for them to have fun while waiting for the food. And if you need anything special, just let us know. The difference in treatment was evident. The family relaxed and was able to enjoy their meal peacefully. Later, a young student arrived, clearly on a limited budget. He looked at the menu and seemed worried about the prices. Andrew, who was passing by the table, noticed the hesitation. "Good evening. Is this your first time here?" "Yes, it is. I heard about the changes and wanted to check it out, but..." The young man hesitated. "But you're worried about the prices?" Andrew asked gently. "A little, yes. No problem at all. We have several options in different price ranges. Can I suggest some delicious dishes that fit better within your budget?" The young man smiled with relief. "That would be great." Andrew not only suggested more affordable dishes, but explained each one with the same care he would dedicate to any customer. Around 10 at night, an elderly lady arrived alone, wearing very simple clothes. It was exactly the type of situation that would have caused problems in the past. Lucy, who was passing by to check the cleanliness of the tables, saw the lady at the entrance looking for someone from the team. "Good evening, ma'am. Can I help you?" "Good evening, dear. I would like to have dinner, but I'm not sure if this is a place for me." "Of course it is. This place is for all people who deserve to be treated well, and you certainly deserve it. Come with me, and I'll ask someone from the team to take very good care of you." Lucy called Brandon, who received the lady with all kindness, patiently explained the menu, and made sure she felt comfortable. During the meal, the lady talked with Brandon about her life. "You know, my son, it's been years since I've been to a restaurant like this. I always thought it wasn't a place for people like me. You can come here whenever you want. You will always be very welcome. You all are different. There's warmth in the way you treat people, you know. It's not just politeness, it's real warmth." At the end of the evening, when the last customer had left, Elizabeth gathered her team. "How did you feel today?" "Fulfilled," Brandon replied immediately. "Every customer who left here left smiling. That's priceless." "I felt useful," said Samantha, "as if my work had a greater purpose than just serving food." "I felt proud," added Andrew. "Proud of the place where I work, proud of the team I'm part of. And I felt important," added Lucy. Several people complimented the cleanliness, but especially the warmth in the atmosphere. Elizabeth smiled with tears in her eyes. "Do you know what happened here today? You didn't just serve meals. You restored dignity to people, created special moments, built positive memories. This is much more than a job, it's a mission." In the following months, the Bellevue became a case study in hospitality and inclusion. Journalists, culinary and business students came to see the restaurant that had transformed from a symbol of exclusion into an example of inclusion. Faith developed the storytelling program she had suggested. Once a month, the restaurant held a special event where people shared their experiences with discrimination and overcoming. It wasn't a sad event, but educational and inspiring. Mr. Edward became a regular and developed a special friendship with Charles, the former bank manager. Together, they started a mentorship project for people going through financial difficulties. Ms. Nancy and her granddaughter Jennifer regularly brought groups of seniors from the shelter to visit the restaurant. Jennifer also started using the Bellevue for meetings related to her work at the NGO. Brandon was promoted to service supervisor and developed an empathy training program that began to be implemented throughout Elizabeth's restaurant chain. Samantha specialized in family service and became responsible for making the restaurant even more welcoming for children and seniors. Andrew created an inclusive menu with options at different price points without compromising quality, and began offering cooking workshops for youth from underprivileged communities. Lucy became cleaning supervisor and created a maintenance protocol that focused not only on cleanliness, but on creating a warm and comfortable environment for everyone. 6 months after the reopening, Elizabeth received an unexpected call. "Hello, Miss Elizabeth. This is Richard." Elizabeth was surprised but remained calm. "Hi, Richard. How are you?" I wanted to ask to speak with you in person, may I?" "Yes, you may. Would you like to come here to the restaurant?" "Actually, I'd prefer somewhere else. I still don't feel comfortable entering the Bellevue." They arranged to meet at a neutral coffee shop. Richard arrived, visibly changed. He had lost weight, looked tired, less arrogant. "Miss Elizabeth, I wanted to apologize," he said as soon as they sat down, "for what I did to you and to all the people I treated poorly." "What made you change your mind?" "Life. After I left the Bellevue, I got another job at a competing restaurant. And you know what happened? I was fired because of my age. The new manager said I didn't have the youthful profile they were looking for." Elizabeth nodded, letting him continue. "When I was job hunting, I went through some humiliations similar to those I caused other people. And I understood firsthand how it hurts to be judged by something that doesn't define who you are. And now? Now I'm working at a simple restaurant on the outskirts. The pay is lower, but the people there are genuine. There's no pretense, no arrogance, and you know what I discovered? I'm happier there than I was at the Bellevue." "That's good, Richard. Miss Elizabeth, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but could you possibly give me a chance to show that I've changed? Not necessarily at the Bellevue, but somewhere in your chain." Elizabeth studied his face for a long moment. "Richard, I can see you're being sincere, but real change takes time to solidify. How about we start slowly?" "How do you mean?" "How about you participate in our volunteer program? Working in community kitchens, getting to know different stories, learning empathy and practice?" "I accept. And after 6 months, if you truly demonstrate genuine change, we'll talk about an opportunity at the company." "Thank you, Miss Elizabeth. Thank you for not giving up on me." Meanwhile, Tyler had taken a different path. He got a job at another luxury restaurant where he continued with the same discriminatory practices. But the market was changing. Customers increasingly valued inclusive establishments, and restaurants that maintained elitist practices were losing clientele. 1 year after leaving the Bellevue, Tyler was unemployed and struggling to find a new position. His reputation in the industry had deteriorated. Meanwhile, the Bellevue prospered. Revenue had increased 40% compared to the previous period, and the restaurant had a waiting list for reservations. More importantly, the team was united, motivated, and proud of the work they did. On a Tuesday afternoon, 2 years after the transformation, Elizabeth was at the restaurant when she saw a scene that moved her deeply. A girl of about 8 years old entered with her mother, a simple woman who worked as a cleaner. It was the girl's birthday, and the mother had saved up to take her to a nice restaurant, exactly as Elizabeth's mother had tried to do decades ago. Brandon welcomed them at the door with a warm smile. "Welcome. What an honor to have you here. Is it a special day?" "It's my daughter's birthday," said the mother timidly. "She turned 8 today." 8 years. What a special age." Brandon bent down to be at the girl's level. "What's your name, princess?" "Lily," replied the girl with a shy smile. "Lily, you are our special guest today. We're going to make this an unforgettable birthday." Throughout lunch, the team made sure to pamper little Lily. Andrew prepared a special dish for her. Samantha brought a small complimentary cake. Lucy made sure the table was impeccable. Elizabeth watched from afar, with tears in her eyes. The scene she had dreamed of as a child was finally happening. A simple mother being able to provide a special moment for her daughter, being treated with dignity and respect. At the end of lunch, Lily's mother approached Elizabeth. "Mom, I wanted to thank you. My daughter is radiant. I've never seen her so happy. Thank you for choosing our restaurant to celebrate this very special day. You know, I was afraid to come in here. I thought they would treat us badly because of our simple clothes. But you made us feel like queens. Because you are queens. Every mother who strives to give the best to her daughter is a queen." That night, Elizabeth wrote a letter to her mother, who had passed away a few years earlier. "Dearest mother, today I fulfilled the dream you couldn't achieve when I was a child. I saw an 8-year-old girl being treated like a princess on her birthday, exactly as you wanted me to be treated. I built more than restaurants, Mother. I built bridges. Bridges between different people, between distinct realities, between what was and what can be. Every time I see a simple family being welcomed here, I see you smiling. Every time an employee treats a customer with dignity, regardless of their appearance, I feel I've honored your memory. You taught me that true elegance isn't in expensive clothes or exclusive places. It's in how we treat people. It's in kindness, respect, empathy. Today I understand that you didn't fail that day when we were turned away from the restaurant. The restaurant failed us, and I promised myself that would never happen again if it depended on me. The Bellevue today is more than a restaurant. It is a symbol that change is possible, that people can evolve, that businesses can be profitable and ethical at the same time. Thank you for teaching me that every human being deserves dignity. Thank you for showing me that we can turn pain into purpose, rejection into inclusion, discrimination into welcome. Your legacy lives on in every smile of a customer who feels welcome, in every employee who treats people with respect, in every child who can celebrate their birthday feeling special. I love you forever, Elizabeth. 3 years after the transformation, the Bellevue had become a national reference in inclusive hospitality. Elizabeth had been invited to speak at universities, culinary schools, and business conferences about the experience of turning discrimination into inclusion. Her original team, Brandon, Samantha, Andrew, and Lucy, had become leaders in their areas and helped train employees from other restaurants in the chain and even from competing companies that wanted to implement similar changes. Richard had completed his volunteer program and now worked as a supervisor at one of the chain's restaurants in the outskirts. His transformation had been genuine and profound. He became one of the most passionate advocates of the inclusion philosophy. The impact of the change had gone far beyond the restaurant. Many of the customers who started frequenting the Bellevue reported that the experience had changed their way of seeing and treating other people in their personal and professional lives. Mr. Edward, who had become a beloved figure at the restaurant, passed away peacefully at 75. His wake was held in the cemetery chapel, but the Bellevue team organized a special tribute at the restaurant. Dozens of people who had met Edward through the restaurant came to share stories and memories. Mr. Edward taught me that age is just a number, said Brandon during the tribute. That experience is a treasure, that kindness is a universal language. He showed me that losing everything materially doesn't mean losing dignity, added Samantha. His elegance came from within. Elizabeth moved, gave the final speech. Edward was one of our most important teachers. He taught us that every customer has a story, every human being has value, every life has meaning. He transformed our restaurant as much as we transformed his. The story of the Bellevue even reached the international media. Journalists from various countries came to learn about the American restaurant that had transformed from a symbol of exclusion into an example of inclusion. A BBC report titled "The Restaurant That Changed Hearts" was seen by millions of people around the world and inspired similar transformations in establishments in other countries. Elizabeth began receiving invitations for international consulting, always with the condition that part of the profit be allocated to local social projects. In an interview with an international magazine, the journalist asked, "Elizabeth, what was the secret to such a profound and lasting transformation?" "It wasn't a secret, it was truth," she replied. "The truth that all people deserve dignity. The truth that empathy can be learned. The truth that ethical businesses are more sustainable than predatory ones." "But how did you convince your team to change?" "I didn't convince anyone. I offered experiences. I put my team in direct contact with the people they discriminated against. When you learn someone's story, it becomes impossible to continue dehumanizing that person. And what would you say to other business owners who want to make similar changes? That they should start with themselves. Question their own prejudices. Examine their own attitudes. Authentic change always starts from the inside out. Have you ever regretted any decision made during this process? Elizabeth Parker thought for a moment. I regret not having done this sooner. I regret allowing discrimination to happen for so long in my establishments, but I don't regret any of the decisions I made to correct it. 5 years after the transformation, the Bellevue celebrated its rebirth anniversary with a special party. Among the guests were hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the change. Customers who became friends, employees who grew professionally and personally, family members who were proud of their loved one's transformation. Faith, who had become the program coordinator for storytelling, presented a collaboratively made documentary about the 5 years of transformation. The film showed moving testimonials from people who had been discriminated against in the past and now felt welcomed. "This story proves that change is possible," said Faith during the presentation. "Not just individual change, but systemic change. When leaders have the courage to question the status quo, entire worlds can be transformed." Brandon, now general manager of the chain, gave a speech about leadership and empathy. "I learned that leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. Responsibility to create environments where all people can flourish. Responsibility to use your position to lift others up, not to diminish them." Samantha, who had become director of customer service, spoke about the importance of second chances. "We all deserve opportunities to grow and change, but these opportunities come with responsibility. The responsibility to truly change, to do better, to honor the trust that has been placed in us." Andrew, now executive chef of the chain, connected gastronomy with humanity. "Cooking is an act of love. When you cook for someone, you're offering nourishment, care, affection. It doesn't matter if it's a $100 dish or a $10 dish. What matters is the love you put into it." Lucy, promoted to environment and hospitality supervisor, brought a unique perspective. "I always knew my work was important, but here I learned that every job done with dedication contributes to something greater. When I clean a table, I'm preparing a space for happy memories. When I straighten a chair, I'm creating comfort for someone. Every small gesture is part of a big experience." At the end of the evening, Elizabeth Parker gave the closing speech. "5 years ago, I entered this restaurant in disguise and left humiliated. Today, I look at this same space and see a place where dignity is the rule, not the exception. Where diversity is celebrated, not just tolerated. Where inclusion isn't a policy, it's a culture. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was built day after day, customer after customer, conversation after conversation. It was built by people who had the courage to question their prejudices and change their attitudes. The Bellevue today is more than a restaurant. It's living proof that change is possible, that businesses can be profitable and ethical, that diversity enriches environments, that empathy can be taught and learned. But most of all, it's proof that every person, absolutely every person, deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to feel welcome. Thank you to everyone who was part of this journey. Thank you to those who had the courage to change. Thank you to those who had the patience to teach. Thank you to those who had the generosity to forgive. And most importantly, thank you to my mother, Dorothy, who, even though she's no longer here, continues to be my inspiration to create a world where all children can be taken by their mothers, to celebrate their birthdays feeling like princesses and princes, regardless of the clothes they're wearing or the money they have in their pockets. The speech was interrupted several times by emotional applause. When Elizabeth finished, the entire audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. That evening, as the restaurant emptied and the lights went out, Elizabeth stayed alone in the dining room for a few minutes. She looked at the tables where so many stories had happened, at the counter where so many transformative conversations had occurred, at the windows through which so much life had passed. Her phone rang. It was a message from Jennifer, Ms. Nancy's granddaughter, who now worked as a human rights lawyer. "Elizabeth, thank you for this moving evening. I wanted to tell you that my grandmother, even sick in the hospital, watched the documentary on her tablet. She cried with joy remembering how you changed her life. She said, 'This girl turned pain into love, rejection into welcome. May God bless her and her whole team. I love you.'" Elizabeth smiled, with tears in her eyes. That was exactly what her mother would have said. She turned off the last lights and left the restaurant, knowing that the next day she would return for another day of building bridges, welcoming people, and proving that a more just and inclusive world isn't just a dream, but a real possibility. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of transformation and overcoming. Do you believe changes like this are possible in real life? Have you ever experienced discrimination or witnessed a similar positive transformation? Share your reflections and personal experiences in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.